Morning, Lisa.
Morning.
Hey, Scott.
Just 1 second.
Looks like you made me co-host already, Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah, I did. I'm just trying to let everybody in. It's being weird, of course.
I let a couple in just now.
Oh, okay. Well,
Looks
I hit the button, let them all in, and it didn't do it. I still had to do them one.
I probably screwed it up on my side then by doing that.
It's okay. We got it.
Okay.
Just double checking. Okay. Let me get your slideshow out just in case, okay?
Sure. Thank you. I've got it open on this side too, but it's good to have the backup there, Lisa.
Okay, everybody. Oh, I've got two. Okay. Well, we'll just leave them both there. I don't know why it did too. I am actually in 3 spots at the same time this morning. Imagine that. Okay. I think we're all here. All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Dalles Chamber Community Affairs. Today, our guest is Dan Spatz. We'll be talking. He's with the City of the Dalles. He is the Economic Development Officer, I think. Did I get that right? And he will be talking to us about Brownfields and all of those different things, and we'll have a chance for questions. But I know with Dan, we'll be able to ask questions while he's presenting. But first off, let's introduce the room. I know he knows most of you, but let's do this so that we all are familiar with who you are and what organization you represent. So we'll begin with Scott.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Scott McKay. I am the community liaison for Circles of Care that connects older adults with older adults who need some kind of periodic support, like transportation to doctor's appointments, pick up prescriptions, or what we do most is friendly visits. Always looking for volunteers. If you're interested, get a hold of me somehow. And we could use a couple of volunteers now because we have about 3 or 4 people. I think about 3 people are looking for someone to visit. Thank you.
Awesome. And yes, if you don't know how to get a Scott, just call me. We'll put you in touch. I promise. David.
Good morning, everybody. Dave Peters, Columbia Cascade Housing, Mid-Columbia Housing Authority. Yeah, we've got projects going in Hood River, the Round Road project, which is Mariposa Village, 130 units. We're just getting started on the west side of the Dalles, where DR's Market used to be. That's going to be about 80 units of affordable housing. And I continue to try to get going on community land trust, but it's a harder nut to crack than I thought. But we're going to hope to be submitting a site plan review to the City of the Dalles for 4 units on 10th Street. So hopefully we'll be able to update on that as we go. Thanks.
Yeah. Bill?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bill Lennox with Six Service Dispute Resolution Center and also with Public Health District. Just a quick update. We had one of our board meetings, Six Rivers did, in the Commodore building. We have a new office down in the downstairs part of the Commodore. It's a lovely office. If anybody is walking down the street, you get a chance to walk in the door, I'm sure they'd be welcoming you. It's a great opportunity, and we're really pleased with the fact that we have a new space now in the Dalles, Oregon.
Is that, Bill, is that right next to the new spa?
Exactly, right next to the new spa.
Yes, it's a gorgeous, she's done an amazing job of fixing that up and just making it beautiful. So can only imagine what the office space looks like too next to it. So
That's exactly, that's Misty down there, and she's done a great
Yes.
job. Yeah,
she's amazing. Yeah.
she is full of energy. Yeah.
Yes, and her passion, yeah, it's just awesome. So I'm glad you guys are next door. That'll be awesome with that, all of that energy going there. Yeah, I'll have to come down and visit. All right, let's do Lori. Are you able to introduce yourself? And if not, go ahead and use the chat if you'd like to. We also have Jennifer Zimmerly.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Awesome.
Great. Please forgive me for not being on camera, but I'm actually taking this meeting as I'm driving. I saw that Dan was the guest speaker today, and I wanted to make sure I was on to hear what he had to say. But Jennifer Zimmerly, Marketing and Communications Manager at Adventist Health Columbia Gorge.
Oh, awesome. Welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Then Tanya.
Tanya Brumley, Community Affairs Manager, Northwest Natural.
Awesome. Welcome. So with that, Dan, I'm going to let you take over and let's get some updates and what we can do. And then I know this personally about Dan. He is not going to object to questions during his presentation, and I will do my best to watch the chat and the screen. So if you raise a hand, for those who are driving and on the phone, just unmute yourself and say, excuse me. Do not be shy. This is what this whole venue is about, is being able to have that communication back and forth.
Very good. Thank you, Lisa. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you for joining. Dan Spatz, again, Economic Development Officer with the City of The Dalles. One of my roles over the past, well, it's not quite 2 years now. I started last July of 2023, has been manager of the cities and the coalition Brownfield program. And this was started a couple of, back in 2020, and we'll go through some of the slides here. But probably ought to start out, okay, what is a brownfield? The term typically refers to old industrial sites, commercial sites, residential sites even, but primarily our focus here is on commercial, old gas stations, industrial sites down in the county. And we tend to find things like buried gas tanks that have been there since the 1920s, 1930s, or more recently, asbestos in buildings, other hazardous materials, things that prevent sites from being put back into productive use. And I don't really know where the term brownfield came from, except they tend to turn brown and ugly over a period of time. They can't be used for anything else. And so the Environmental Protection Agency has funded a series of programs across the United States. We've been very, very fortunate in the Mid-Columbia region to benefit from several of these. I talk about the Dalles Brownfield program. That's a simplification, because that's only the most recent of 4 or 5 different EPA investments in the community. Close partnership with Oregon Department of Environmental Quality and Business Oregon. So our local take on all this started back in 2020. Matthew Cleaves, who's now the city manager, was with Wasco County at the time. He and the port, Andrea at the port, Mid-Columbia Economic Development District, and Wasco County developed a competitive proposal to Business Oregon that had an integrated planning grant, and that kind of assessed the need for brownfield recovery in the area. It set the stage for a competitive application to EPA. That was successful. It resulted in a $600,000 grant. It started as a 3-year grant, and we were able to extend it for another year. It just ended this past fall. And we'll go into some of the projects that were completed as a result of that. That's one brownfield program. I'm going to be talking about 3 or 4 others that have also come down the pipeline here. Uh-oh, I hope that my screen will advance. Yes, it did. Okay. A little bit more detail. I've just kind of covered this over that first 2020 grant. And I refer to this as the coalition grant because it was the city, the port, and the county with MCED participation, but focused on all of Wasco County, not only the Dalles, primarily the Dalles, but we also did projects in Mosher, Duffer, Antelope. I think there might have been one in Chanico as well. Really credit Jim Swinoff, who is retired from City Public Works here a couple of years back. But Jim carried the management role for this before I came on board, and I kind of inherited that from Jim. So let's talk about some of the others, and then we'll talk about, okay, how does this actually work? So 2022, MCED received $1 million brownfield grant for all 5 counties. This was the first grant in EPA Region 10, they're based out of Seattle, that actually crosses a state boundary. So you have the entire MCED jurisdiction, Klickitat, Skamania, Hood River, Wasco, Sherman counties participating in this. This is ongoing now. MCED basically allocates a certain amount per county, and then each county is able to apply for and for various projects in each county. Once that allocation is used up for the year per county, then they need to wait for the following year. So Wasco County's cycle is just starting. I think it's going to be in April that MCED will be accepting applications again for, or actually processing projects for Wasco County through this grant. So that covers Wasco County. Talked about the geography there, and 7 active projects in that grant that are underway now, probably more than that actually. Lindsay McClure with MCED is the project manager at MCED on that one. More recently, North Wasco County School District has received a $500,000 cleanup grant. The grants I've been talking about so far, the coalition and the MCED grant, are assessment grants. So they don't actually do cleanup. They go in and they find out the extent of a problem. They locate tanks, things like that. And then you have other mechanisms, funding mechanisms to do the cleanup. That's where DEQ comes in, Business Oregon, and EPA, providing the funds in concert with local property owners to actually get rid of the problem, mitigate the problem, and however that might be. The $500,000 to the school district dedicated toward the Chenoweth Middle School to clean that up, take care of the asbestos in the building, and prep it for later renovation. Again, we'll talk about that one here in just a second, to turn that into a child care center. That's a project that, of course, near and dear to my heart. The big one that we received under contract just in December is almost $20 million to conduct that renovation. This is another EPA grant. And then finally, this past fall, the city received its own EPA $500,000 assessment grant. And that's what we're in the midst of rolling out right now. Here are some of the projects completed over the past 4 years through that coalition grant. Again, this just wrapped up this past fall. We'll go through some of the terminology, but a phase 1 ESA. Let's see if I got it. Yep, I got it right here. A lot of terminology, a lot of government acronyms dealing with the program. It's taken me a while to figure it out, and I still get new ones all the time. But basically, phase 1 environmental is preliminary research, paperwork research, old file research, old maps, to do a preliminary scan of a site to kind of focus additional exploration. And there's a lot of going through old documentation, old digital files, leading to phase 2, which is more focused. You're actually taking equipment out into the field, and you have a pretty good idea what to look for based on phase 1. Now, phase 2 is going to narrow it down. You have regulated building materials, of course. Asbestos is the big one there. The grants also cover reuse planning, cleanup and reuse. Good example of that downtown is Sigmund's Flowers, the Oaks Hotel. So the coalition grant actually paid not only for asbestos mitigation in that one, but asbestos assessment, but also some preliminary planning to convert the upper level of that building into residential housing. And there's a nice tie-in with Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal on that one, because Urban Renewal can then come in with funding to help with the program. And that's actually happened just this week, Tuesday. The Urban Renewal Agency, we approved a $240,000 grant to Michael and Claudia Leash to develop 4 upper story residential units in the Oaks Hotel, Sigmund Flowers. That started with brownfield assessment. The exterior work that you see on that building, the facade, that's another grant program, Oregon Main Street, $200,000 grant that allowed Claudia to fix the facade of that building. Another aspect of this is called area-wide planning. So Wasco County, a couple of years back, year and a half, I think, purchased about 159 acres west of Chenoweth Creek. The idea being convert that into eventually into a series of ball fields as a replacement for Kramer Field, should the hospital, when and if the hospital is able to relocate to Kramer Field. If that does not happen, the county could still use Kramer for other purposes. Right now, of course, it's our central recreational complex. Turning that 159 acre, it's in the scenic area, into ball field complex, that's going to be quite an undertaking. It's not going to be easy, but the role of the brownfield funding in this case was simply to do some preliminary planning, just in case, setting the groundwork for that later work. I talked about phase 1, level 1. Here's where the old file research comes in. This is a Sanborn map. And I don't know if people are familiar with these, but there was an insurance agency that operated, the latter half of the 19th century, well into the 20th century, even up into the 50s and 60s. They would go through and identify sites for purposes of insurance. This was a gas station, this was a grocery store, this was a barber shop, and so on. Well, those maps have been digitized, and they're a really, really nice way to track down old locations. This is downtown the Dalles. This is Federal. You're looking at 2nd Street, right in the middle, 3rd off to the left. And I don't know if you can see my cursor. There's a Civic Auditorium over here. This is now the farm stand, this area here. And of course, that was the Dalles Chronicle. And before that, it was Sawyer's True Value. And before that, it was Brady's Market, Bill Brady. But from a brownfield perspective, this map is highly relevant, because what do we see here? Garage. That's where the parking lot is right now. Auto repair, auto storage. Now, a nice little historic perspective. Before this was auto repair, that was the Boat Opera House. The sign on the Morin printing up here identifies as the Boat Opera House. Really wasn't, it was down here. And you can actually trace that through some of the old photos after the fire of 1890. So it's kind of cool. This alley is still in existence. That's a little cool little cafe that's off of the farm stand now. That's where we had the newspaper archives back when the Chronicle was there. So going back to brownfield, I'm easy to digress into historical stuff, but keep that garage in mind, that auto repair in mind here, auto supplies. That's always a good signal that there's an old gas tank somewhere. And there's how we go about locating it. This is ground penetrating radar. This is not the farm stand site. I'll get to that in just a second, but these are some alleys downtown the Dalles where a technician will come out and use a portable handheld device, scan the asphalt, and you come up with magnetic anomalies. Those red concentrations suggest steel, iron, something of that nature, tanks. Again, this is level 2 environmental analysis. Here are some other examples, and here you can see where they've been outlined for excavation. We did this most recently with Neon Sign Museum. Of course, the Bancos will be bringing in the horses from the Jansen Beach Carousel for preservation steps for restoration taking place in the basement of the Neon Sign Museum. Well, there was a big old boiler that had been removed from the basement of the Neon Sign Museum. There were a couple of pipes coming up through the floor, and one of those pipes had oil seeping right over the top of it, which kind of puts a damper on the idea of restoring carousel horses in there. So the Neon Sign Museum approached us. This was still under the coalition grant that concluded this past fall. And we conducted a survey of the parking lot next to the Neon Sign Museum, found out where a tank actually had been located, had already been removed. So that was some good news there. It turned out to be some underground pressure or something that was causing that seepage. We were able to rectify that as part of that work. And that's no longer a problem. The carousel project is going forward there. Now we talk about the farm stand. So you start with that magnetic scan earlier, and then you find stuff like this. I don't know if you can see my cursor there. There's the tip of a tank. This is 3rd Street right here. And so Zeke Stelzer had conducted earlier work on his, he'd contracted separately a level 1 environmental. Looks like Brian's joining us there. And found one tank from that. They pulled that tank, and then they found another one. Remember the map that I showed here earlier? Right here, we're talking about this area, specifically right in this area here. You found one tank, they found another tank, then another, then another. All told, 5 tanks eventually. There's still probably some soil contamination. So you see at that corner, we've left the sidewalk open. Zeke has been waiting for us to start our new grant. This will be one of the top priorities, is to get back in, see what extent there might be some soil contamination, do additional assessment, and then look for some funding to take care of that issue, and we can finally close that up. In the meantime, there's a beautiful building, and Brownfield program helped with that a little bit. I would say that Zeke took care of most of this himself. He wasn't able to time it out properly to take full advantage of Brownfield, but we had a role in that. Urban Renewal had a role in the building itself. We contributed $50,000 for a commercial kitchen to that building. Tank removal. One of the things you do in level 2 probe what is in there. Is it bunker oil? Is it diesel? Is it gas? There's a residence in town with an old gas tank. Leaded gas had probably been there for 40 years, and the darn stuff was still fairly fresh, being leaded. And that's a problem. Here are some of the things that have been accomplished through the coalition. So the old Dalles Hospital, Annex A, preliminary work up there, asbestos. I believe a tank was pulled as part of this or earlier before that. And there's still some work to be done up there. The goal for the county is actually to take down that annex and replace it with housing. So again, that work has to take place first. Tony's Town and Country. There is an issue for you. The city, and I cannot remember if I was on council at the time or not, but the city bought Tony's Town and Country, and before we, I'm gonna admit Corliss up here. Hello, Corliss. After that purchase occurred, and this is the wrong order, the city conducted a level 1 environmental. You don't want to do that before you buy a building as a public entity. No surprise, there was asbestos all over the building, and the city ended up basically, and Urban Renewal basically ended up eating the cost for that. We got a little bit of assistance from Business Oregon, from DEQ, Business Oregon primarily. But that's kind of a lesson learned. Before a public entity does anything in terms of acquiring buildings, have the owner do a level 1. Same thing with private owners. This is what Tony's site looks like now. This past Tuesday, Urban Renewal Agency did select a proposal for development of this site, and that involves a fermentation hub with an educational component. I won't go into too much more detail than that right now because we are negotiating details on that. But we do have a pretty promising multi-million-dollar development scheduled for that site adjacent to Federal Street Plaza. Did I miss a slide? Nope. The old Soda Works, of course, down on East 2nd. That's before, during, and after, now ready for development. And of course, Chenoweth Middle School, Columbia Gorge Early Learning and Resilience Hub. Multi-million-dollar project closing in on $28 million total renovation, turning this into an early learning center and climate resilience center. So let's go through where we are now. The city received $500,000 grant. It took about 6 months, 7 months for the paperwork, the various review processes within EPA to come together after we received the award and before we got the contract. We got the contract just in December. Fast-tracked the process for advertising RFP for a technical contractor who comes on board. That's they call it a qualified environmental professional. It's someone who really knows the science of this stuff. And we needed to do, of course, a competitive procurement. The coalition contract had been under a company called Stantec. Fellow lives on the off the Oregon coast, but on the Oregon coast, Len Farr, tremendous individual. They have competed for the new grant. We're in the review process. There are a couple of other very competitive proposals submitted. We hope to have a selection here within a couple of weeks. And once that selection is made, once that technical contractor is on board, we can finally get to the waiting list of projects that we have in the Dalles. The Gloria Center is one of those, a site next to it owned by Wasco County. The old bus barns on West 10th, that's going to be a big one. Couple of smaller projects. I mentioned the farm stand is still out there. You'll see a empty patch of gravel in front of the Moose Lodge. There's probably a tank under the sidewalk there. That one's on hold. There are several others. And that's the end of the slide deck. Talk a little bit about, without going too much into politics, but the drama over a pause, as they call it, in federal funding grants has definitely created some complications here. The Chenoweth Middle School project right now is effectively on hold until we can clarify the future of the $20 million EPA grant. We had a call set up with the program officer on that last week, and that was abruptly postponed by the EPA with no reason given. So we're trying to figure that one out. The city's Brownfield grant, we want to be very cautious about that. It's a different funding source, appropriations rather than a competitive grant. So it's a little bit more secure that way, believe it or not. But we want to run a fairly small test on a small invoice to be sure that we will be reimbursed for the cost of that invoice before we go into any major encumbrances on the city, just to see if it comes through. We're getting conflicting signals at the federal level as to whether people are being reimbursed or not. So stay tuned on that one. Outreach team will be going back in March. I'll be on there. We'll be trying to get some additional clarification on that one and promoting the case for the Chenoweth Middle School. A lot of work has gone into that. We don't want to walk away from that, but there is some risk there. So there's the website, and I will follow. I'll put that into the chat box here in just a second. But that's about it from me. Are there any questions?
Dan, this is Brian. Sorry, I missed your early part of your program. I had a little bit of a problem here, but your funding, you mentioned obviously the federal funding is in limbo, which and just been checking with my colleagues on the agricultural side. A lot of research grants and researchers have been laid off here, which is going to be a real problem for the tree fruit and small grains industries, to say the least. But do you see the state kind of stepping up to help out a little bit to kind of fill some of these gaps where maybe the federal folks are going to pull back?
What was repeat your question, Brian? Do I see who stepping up?
Do you see the state picking up kind of maybe a little bit of the slack if the feds pull back their funding?
The state could, but the challenge on some of this, a lot of it is so much of the funding originates at federal level. So the state certainly has resources, but oftentimes they're flow through. So it may originate as a federal source. Certainly the state has some funding available, but the process of it's such a multi-stage between assessment and getting in there and having the right qualifications for the people who are doing the work. That's going to be kind of tough. It's going to be difficult. Certainly we can do some of this on smaller projects, but things like the middle school, no, that's going to be on hold until we get this figured out.
Tanya?
Figured out.
Yeah, Dan, I just was curious on the underground oil tanks. It appeared from what you were showing that those were all tanks that were not decommissioned, or are you also removing decommissioned tanks that might be with slurry and so forth?
They had been decommissioned in the sense they'd been forgotten about.
But not the proper EPA DEQ decommissioning.
Correct.
Okay.
That's what we do as part of the follow-up mitigation work. You can fill tanks in place under some circumstances with sand, or you can pull them. It just depends on the nature of the problem. Through the assessment grant that we have, we can do some limited work. You can pull a little bit of soil out from beneath the tank if it appears very clear that there's no underground plume that's taken place, or very minimal leakage or no leakage. And it just depends on the situation. If there's a good overstory above the tank, it looks like it's pretty solid, you can fill it in place. If it's pretty close to the surface, there's some risk of collapse or something like that, then pull it.
Well, and it's kind of interesting, like just to hearing about the market, because my impression was, I thought in real estate that the oil tanks were supposed to be noted when you transfer a property, but my guess is that maybe they didn't even, it's been so long and so many transitions of ownership that maybe that just fell through the cracks, that they didn't have any clue there was 5 tanks on that property.
And that's where the level 1 comes in, because part of that analysis is not only finding out what might be there, but who has owned it through the decades. One of the challenges that we run into, there has to be a break in ownership in order to allow mitigation, publicly funded mitigation, to occur. There's a former fuel farm in the Dalles where, unfortunately, the same family has had an ownership link in that farm for I don't know how long, probably 50, 60 years, something like that. In order for public mitigation funds to kick in, that property had to have been sold entirely, divested, and sold again. There have to be 2 transfers of ownership. And then there's a break in ownership, and then you can come in and help. But as it is, the family's still on the hook for that cleanup, because there's a continuous chain of ownership that goes back to the point when it was a fuel farm. It hasn't been used in a fuel farm for decades. Entirely different uses, but there's still that company link and that family. The company, the current family member inherited the corporate remnants of that company, basically, but that still creates that tie-in. So that's one of the things you do in level 1, is that ownership research. And as applicants come forward, they need to document that too. There's an online portal through the city, and then we do an application process with EPA, and all of that chain of ownership needs to be documented in that application.
That's really interesting. And one last question then is, with like the Lockheed Martin situation out there at the old plant, obviously that's their ownership, but is there any movement on that project? I realize that's probably millions, but does that fall into this brownfield at all?
It does not, but that doesn't mean that we're not looking at that. That's a whole different, really, really good question. I don't believe that is still considered a Superfund site. It is actively monitored. And I'll throw another one out there too that is very much in use, and that's the tie plant. you know, the Dalles is just about out of industrial space. We would love to be able to do something with that tie plant. That is going to be I think it's monitored by DEQ. I know that there's some monitoring that takes place there now. And we just had a call actually with DEQ and EPA a few weeks ago to kind of explore that question on both of these sites. Millions, probably billions of dollars in terms of the old Martin Marietta. The company doesn't want to do anything with it now because it's stationary, it's monitored, it's there. If you start to move it, then you encounter all sorts of complexities. But it is valuable industrial space. At some point, we've got to do something with it. It's not going to be easy. Where do you put it? The same thing with the tie plant. The railroad actually owns that property and leases it to the tie plant. They need to have those ties treated somewhere close to a main line, UP main line. So where else might it go? Eventually, we've got to tackle those things. There is a program through EPA that is a kind of dedicated to this type of thing. And we had the program director on the call a few weeks back just to kind of start that conversation. It's going to be a long range strategic goal, but it is one that we have identified in the city, and we're going to start chipping away at it. We got to wait for clarity on the federal situation. All of that is just throwing a monkey wrench into this right now. But at some point, we've got to do that, Tanya. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, good replies. Thank you.
Other questions? Probably bored everybody to tears, but I appreciate the time. I'll shut this down.
And I put the link to the website that you had at the bottom of your presentation. It's over in the chat, along with another page for the City of the Dalles was just information about Brownfield, and then also McKed's information about it. And then the one that says "Welcome to the City of the Dalles" is the one that Dan had at the bottom of his presentation, just so you guys have them and be able to grab those.
Thank you, Lisa.
You bet. Bill, go ahead.
Hi, this is somewhat on a different topic, but one that Dan brought up about going back to DC as part of the outreach team. I was just curious if you'd be willing to share, or if you have any idea what some of the priorities are going to be on that trip.
EDA funding, being certain that we have projects like the airport, business park, and the college training hangar, keeping that on track. That's an EDA grant. So is that affected? We hope not. The Chenoweth Middle School certainly is a high priority. The Early Learning Center, trying to keep that funding back into the mix. I have a copy of the OMB memo that went out that directs agencies just to shut down everything. And the language is so broad that it's scary. I also have a copy of the court order that then said, you know, don't do that. You can't do that. But the fact is, it's happening. I'm talking with congressional staff constantly. They're trying to figure out what's going on. That's going to be a priority. The port has a boat ramp that needs to be repaired, replaced. That's going to be a priority. The navigation center, major county priority. We're looking for additional funding on that project to take care of that third element of the of mental health care in the city. The hospital is submitting a CDS request, congressionally directed funding. We'll be supporting that one. That has to do with the obstetrics care at the hospital and Medicaid reimbursement. Hospital is losing a significant amount of money annually on uncompensated Medicaid cases in OB/GYN. And I just saw some information on that yesterday. So it won't be a formal priority for the outreach team, but it is something we want to be careful to support, speak on behalf of the hospital whenever the occasion arises.
It should be an exciting a journey back there this time, just to figure out what building to go into that's open or closed.
Yeah. Yep. It can be crazy times. Week of March 10th. We'll be going back, Bill.
Now, Dan, who's going on the team? What team members are going back?
It's gonna be a small team. Andrea, Greg, Scott, and me. Commissioner Hagee, Andrea Kloss, Commissioner Greg Wiest from the port, and myself representing the city. The key player on all of this is going to be Cliff Bench. So he's toured through the Chenoweth Middle School. We've spoken to him about the fact that it's located in the National Scenic Area, which really constrains potential uses. This is one of the few things you can do with that building. Anything much different, then it's just got to stay vacant basically, and eventually would be demolished, and then you would still have the asbestos to clean up. So that'll be a priority, and just trying to figure out what in the world is going on. I don't know.
Thank you for being there. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, because Dan, I know, has been part of the outreach team for so many years now, and that he truly is the holder of the history of the group going back there and formulating it and pulling it together. So thanks again that you're still riding the pony.
This will be the last time for me. I'm retiring the end of March.
I don't know. I still foresee you doing volunteering work.
Oh, I definitely want to stay engaged. Yep.
That's March of 2026, right, Dan?
All right, Tony. No.
Oh, shoot.
I got about 50 years of brush I've got to be clearing up here. It's not going away.
So, no, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? See, Dan, you did such a great job. You got us all answered. Or at least for the moment, until the coffee kicks in.
Well, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the time.
So, no, we thank you for just giving us some updates. And then actually you've got some links to that. And so then always because these are recorded, we'll have them out hopefully within a week up on our YouTube. So if you can't quite remember something, you can go back and grab that recording. They'll be on the Dalles Chamber. And or if you need something sooner, let us know and we'll get something to you. But if there's no further questions, I'm going to give us back some time because that's rare with all of us who are busy on this screen. Just remember, if you're wondering when anything is happening, check out the Dalles Chamber's community calendar. It is there. We would love for people to share it. So as they're planning out their events, we don't step on somebody else's event, making sure that we give all of our events their full chance and opportunity for people to enjoy. Yes, we're in full steam ahead with the Cherry Festival, which will be the April 25th through the 27th. But we have things going on before then, like our normal networking events and stuff like that. So, but until then, we will see you for sure, probably next Thursday on the screen. If you have our e-blast, it has the speakers for the month listed out, so you guys know who is which Thursdays and all those dates. So unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I would say have a great Thursday and have a good weekend, and take care.
Thank you all.